Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Stacey Coceres. I am a Resilience and Sustainability Analyst for the Palm Beach County Office of Resilience. Today, we're here to discuss the flood and sea level rise risk assessment for the town of Haverhill. We sincerely appreciate you taking the time to join us and to share your insights on this critical project. Community engagement is a top priority for the Office of Resilience. Your participation is essential for two main reasons. It ensures our ability to keep you informed about potential risks that are facing our county and the type of work that we're doing to address them. And just as importantly, it also allows us to learn directly from you about your community's specific needs, concerns, and priorities as they relate to flood and sea level rise resilience. Today, we're going to give you an overview of the project goals and learn more about what flooding risks you are currently experiencing and what your concerns are for the future. We're going to use this feedback and develop a flood and sea level rise risk assessment report, which will help us prioritize flood adaptation projects and make the town of Haverhill eligible for flood adaptation funding from the state of Florida. Your local knowledge and perspectives are vital as we work to build a more resilient town of Haverhill for the future. Now I'm going to pass it off to Georgia and the rest of the Tetra Tech team to get us started. And there will also be opportunity for questions and discussion throughout the session. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you. All right, well, thanks everyone for coming tonight. We're really excited to be here to talk to you about the flood and sea level rise risk assessment that we're about to embark on for the community. We have, as Stacey mentioned, we're going to be talking about the project objectives, trying to get some local knowledge, talk about our continued role with outreach, and we'll talk about the schedule and discuss any questions that you may have. We do have a team supporting this project. It includes Tetra Tech. My name is Georgia Vince. Next to me today is Erin Deedy. She has her own firm. She's a planner and an attorney. S.A. Nelson is here, and they are supporting us on the with the technology. And Clearview Geographic is a firm that we use to help with our data analysis. And again, the Palm Beach County team is here as well, and that includes Palm Beach County and the town staff. So we're really looking to develop a cohesive strategy to identify the vulnerabilities to the flooding risks. We'll assess the flooding hazards and ensure we comply with the state and state legislation, as this project was funded by a state grant. We really hope to guide and identify future actions that the town and the county can take to offset those potential impacts. And then we really want to ensure that we increase eligibility for state and federal grant funding. I'll turn it over to Erin for a few words on our vulnerability assessment that we will be completing.
So the state of Florida has made money available to local communities to do planning work or vulnerability assessments, which is basically an effort where we analyze different data about current and future flood risk and where your assets are to see how they may be impacted by that over time. The state of Florida also provides money to local communities to undertake adaptation projects which help alleviate that flood risk to certain assets that we identify. That legislation was passed in 2021. It was known as the Always Ready legislation, and it provides the framework for these programs, but it also provides certain parameters that you have to operate by to get the money. For one thing, they want to see your current flooding conditions and all of the assets within the town of Haverhill evaluated. And then we have to project further out. And so for this study, we're looking at 2050, 2080, and we also look at 2100. And that helps us get a good picture of what's going to potentially happen to things like roads, bridges, drainage structures, this town hall, other facilities that the community really cares about. And so what we're doing right now is collecting that information about the different community assets to try to prioritize and figure out what's the most important to make sure that we protect. So we will identify what we call flooding hotspots. And those are areas where we're seeing some level of current or future flood risk. And then the timing of when that flood risk is projected to impact the community. And we will be bringing that back to you, the results of the analysis, for additional public input and stakeholder input. Right now, what we're looking to do is introduce the project to you and try to get feedback about the potential assets to make sure that we've included everything to be evaluated.
Whoops.
So as I mentioned, the legislation, the state has been providing funds to local governments to do these types of assessments for quite some time. But what was happening is communities were not evaluating the same parameters and they were using the same data. So what you would see the city of Key West doing was entirely different than what you would see the city of Pensacola or all points in between. Or what you would see an inland community evaluate was different than what you would see a coastal community evaluate. So the state put together some parameters and said, you know, if we're going to provide this money for you to do vulnerability assessments, we want to see the same data and the same work products come out of every community jurisdiction for our use, because the state is also creating a central data system where they're managing that information about the assets and about the flood risk. So they want to make sure that the outcomes of all of these different studies can be used in assembling that statewide data set. So they tell us that we have to use certain elevation data. We have to look at least 2 sea level rise scenarios. We have to look at different types of flooding conditions, such as rainfall, combined flooding. They want us to look at both the 2050 and the 2080 scenario. So I'll talk a little bit about what those flood conditions are that we have to look at. So we have to look at sea level rise, high tide flooding, storm surge, rainfall, and compound flooding. And that's a lot of different types of flooding, and not all of those types of flooding may impact Haverhill directly, but it may affect, for instance, where your water goes and how it drains to the coast, depending on how your drainage system operates. So we have evaluated all of these different types of flood scenarios countywide, and now we're working with certain municipalities to see how their assets and see how their flood risk coordinates or kind of dovetails with that flooding that flood analysis that we've done countywide. Locally, it's probably going to be rainfall that is the most impactful flood in scenario. We will look at the 100-year and the 500-year rainfall events, but there may be impacts also from storm surge, where you have those high volume, short duration kind of events. So we will look at all of these different flood scenarios and see how they potentially impact the town. This is just a quick graphic that kind of demonstrates what some of our output may look like. The colors may differ a little bit per jurisdiction when we start getting real brass tacks down to what is going to happen within the local community. But generally, those greens are lower levels of flooding, 0 to 5 inches or something like that. As you start to get into the yellows and the oranges and the reds, that's where you're going to see higher depths of flooding. A lot of times what you'll see is that water bodies or canals or natural areas, wetlands, parks will tend to start to see those flooding impacts sooner because they're typically lower in elevation. But what we want to do is make sure that this type of output is consistent with what you see locally when there's a rain event. You guys are going to know where certain intersections flood, where certain roads flood, where certain drainage structures may be over impacted by a certain flood event, or where you would expect to see the flooding in parks or natural areas around ponds in developments or parks, that type of thing. So we want to make sure that our output, once we have it and we're ready to kind of present it to the community, that we've had some input from the staff and that we ultimately know that what we're presenting makes sense and it should align with what people see in the community during a rain event. And so now we're going to do some online surveying, and Georgia's going to explain what that program is and how to access it with your phone.
Yeah, so folks in the room, you can scan the QR code on the screen, or you can go to menti.com in the browser and type in the code 7421-4041, and you'll get to our first question. All right, so the question is, what type of flooding have you observed in your community? We're starting to see the answers come through, as rainfall being the most common. Hopefully we'll get a few more responses come through today. Again, as Aaron mentioned, the location of Haverhill, really does, it really will likely be the rainfall that's the most impactful, but we also will look at potential storm surge conditions if we got a direct hit from a hurricane, and also those compound flooding issues. So this is good feedback for the survey. I will move forward and talk about critical assets. We've mentioned several times the assets of the town we will be evaluating. There are specific requirements in the statute that outline exactly what we need to look at, including transportation, infrastructure such as roads and bridges. Critical infrastructure is all of your utility infrastructure, water, wastewater, electrical utility, and stormwater infrastructure. Community and emergency facilities are schools, emergency operations centers, shelters, things like that. And natural, cultural, and historic resources could be parks or historic buildings, things like that. Okay. We'll also be looking at regionally significant assets. So not necessarily things that are owned and operated by the town, but things that are critical to continue operation of the town or support the community. These might be a regional water resource facility, a medical facility or a hospital, utilities, larger natural areas, airports and seaports, even 95 or the turnpike could be considered a regionally significant asset here. There we go. All right. So the question is, what assets are in your community are important to you? And this is an open-ended question. You can type in anything that you might use every day, or assets that you feel are important to the community. Anything from the list previously. Things that could potentially be affected by storms or extreme rain events. We got a couple answers coming through. All right. Road seems like the big winner here. Do you all get a lot of road flooding during rain events?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Whoops, I'm off the chart here. All right. So for the project, we actually have specific deliverables that we need to prepare and deliver to the Department of Environmental Protection. And that includes a data analysis. So we've initiated data collection for the town. We'll then perform a flooding and exposure analysis using GIS or online tools that help evaluate the depth of flooding through all those different scenarios and timing events. And then we'll do a sensitivity analysis to see which assets are more sensitive to those flooding scenarios, and look to see if we should identify flooding focus areas where we should prioritize the assets to be evaluated for adaptation or mitigation. We'll prepare a vulnerability assessment report with maps and tables, and we will be preparing a draft first. We'll come back to the community with the results of the draft, and then we'll finalize that report with your input and feedback and submit it to DEP. The deadline for the grant is April 2026, but we're looking to expedite that schedule and complete these before that deadline. Oops. We also have a project steering committee that we're working with for the project. They will help us review the goals in the project and the modeling methodologies, assist in identifying available data if there's other assets here that we haven't identified previously, and then review the project findings and recommendations prior to finalizing the report. As I mentioned, we will have a couple of public meetings, including this one, to introduce the project and get feedback from the community on your flooding concerns and your assets. And then meeting 2, we'll discuss the vulnerability assessment results and make sure we're on point and gather any additional information prior to submitting it to the Department of Environmental Protection. All right, we got another Minty question. So what services and our facilities would be most critical to you during or after a climate event? So we have hospitals, emergency services, transportation, government, community services, and electric utilities. And we have some answers coming in. All right. All right, good input. Again, I think we hear a lot that electric utilities and water utilities after an event are critical and important to communities. And of course, having access to emergency services if needed, and roads being navigable is also a high priority for communities. So just to kind of summarize, our next steps will complete the data collection and do any identify any data gaps that we may have. We'll initiate the GIS modeling for the resilient Florida flood scenarios, and then look to see where your flooding focus areas exist and incorporate additional feedback from the public through the process. I did want to share that we have 2 surveys that are live. It's a climate survey that the county has been using to collect data from all community members throughout the county. And then a flood survey where folks can report specific flooding events. You can take pictures, you pinpoint a location in that survey and provide feedback to the county so they can track exactly where the flooding exists. And I think that is it for us. So we will take any questions or discuss any topics with you if you like from here. So this study is more of a computer-based GIS model, and we look at the elevation of the land with the flood depths over it. So we don't, there may be some connection between the FEMA flood maps, but we don't utilize them as a baseline. We use them as an informational tool, but we don't use them to inform any of the results.
It's an independent analysis from what the flood insurance rate maps are.
And again, this is really just to inform DEP of, that you are involved in this process, that your assets are important to you. We'll be submitting your asset information to the state of Florida so they can put it in their statewide database. And then that'll provide you with an opportunity for future funding through their implementation grant program. If we identify projects that you want to pursue funding for in the future. All right. No questions online?
No.
Okay, great. All right. Any more questions in the room? All right. If not, thank you all so much for your time, and we look forward to being back here and talking to you about the results. Thank you.